Hi, we're here at the Water Valley Schoolhouse here at Bowen Meadow Ranch, and this schoolhouse was actually the last remaining building for the Water Valley town site. And that town site was actually established in 1887, and this was used as a schoolhouse there. And then in the 1980s, this is interesting, this schoolhouse was moved to Sheridan Lake, Colorado, and used as part of a roadside history park by Clarence Wolk. Now, and then you fast forward a little bit later in 2016, his daughter knew of my parents' interest in this schoolhouse, and then they struck a deal and they moved this schoolhouse out here to the Bowen Meadow Ranch, and it's been here since. Now, originally, the schoolhouse was 12 feet by 16 feet with a window on each side and a window in the back. Many years later, an 8-foot addition was added to the back, and then added a window to each side. And um, this schoolhouse for us, it really does represent a testament of truth. And that's important to note, that this is a testament of truth because it's a symbol and it's almost a parallel to our book and our account of an accurate, truthful account of discovery of the actual Sand Creek site, the lost Sand Creek site. And so this schoolhouse really, it was known, and these schoolhouses were known for being steadfast in teaching values and steadfast in teaching things that were good, right, and true. And unfortunately, we don't see that as much today. We don't see that in the schools in our country. We're seeing things that are more emotionally driven rather than things that are truthful. And we're about truth, and we're about sharing truth and sharing what we found at Sand Creek. And interestingly, what we know from Water Valley is it was 7 miles northeast of Chivington, and that's important to note because in the early 2000s, some members of the National Park Service team, a historian and one of their archaeologists, were in my parents' home in two different trips, and they each saw in their each respective trip, they saw hundreds of period Sand Creek artifacts, bullets and arrowheads and cannonball shell fragments and uh, kettle fragment parts, and they saw coffee grinder parts. And so in the early 2000s, a few years after they were in my parents' home, they actually decided to write a book. And in this book, they talk about how what my parents found is they tried to make the claim that mom and dad found this proposed town site called New Chicago. But interestingly, the newspapers back in the day, at the time when this town site was proposed, they documented where it was to be. And New Chicago was proposed to be 2 miles just north of Water Valley. And so we know that Water Valley being 7 miles northeast of Chivington, this puts the proposed New Chicago site, they've missed their mark by 3 miles. And so interestingly, they said where they put their X of New Chicago on their map, this place was littered with cannonball shell fragments, literally called a cannonball field. And we know that there was no town site littered with cannonball shell fragments, that this was um, undoubtedly part of the battlefield at Sand Creek, and they tried to minimize their discovery. And so, what we know though is that we have these artifacts, we have them to show what was actually found. And so, it's interesting that by we know the documentation of where these town sites were, we know that not only did New Chicago not where they said the X was, but New Chicago never happened. And so that's important to note that the town site never even took off. But what is true are the artifacts. The artifacts cannot lie. And they were all found starting over 2 miles up the creek from where that monument used to stand over at the National Park Service site. So this building truly does stand as a testament of truth. It's like a parallel to our story of discovery. And the truth is what we truly care about, is just simply telling the truth and sharing our story about the artifacts and the story that they tell, because that story is undoubtedly true. And so in just a moment, I'm going to share a little bit about kind of some of the people that taught here or were involved in the school, and we'll get to that here in just a moment. So we're outside the Water Valley Schoolhouse, and this shot is actually really similar to a photo that was taken in the 1960s. And there's a couple people in this photo that actually taught there. And there's Mrs. Buck She taught at the school, and she actually ended up later teaching at the Eads School and taught Dad in second grade. Next to her in the picture is Andy McCracken, and then next to him is Doug McCracken, and then Mrs. Garricky, who taught at the school at the Water Valley Schoolhouse, and then also taught Dad at Eads Middle School. And then next to her is Lois McCracken, and we believe that Nancy McCracken Walker was the photographer of this photo, and that Doug also attended school there. And this is just kind of a shot of that, what that schoolhouse looks like compared to what it did in the 1960s, and then showing a couple of the teachers that were there. And then also, one of their dreams also was to kind of reunite with that merry-go-round from the school. If you happen to know where that merry-go-round might be, let us know, and certainly send us a message. We would love to get connected with that again.